And then we got finally the Norse gods, right? In pagan Germany, they had Balder, known as the Norse god of light and rebirth. He is the equivalent of the Greek Apollo. Though he was killed, it is believed that he will be reborn. How about that? Yeah, we believe the same thing about the first beast. He will come out of a pit, even though he's a king who was, is not, and will come out of a pit and go to destruction. And then we have Odin, depicted as the enthroned ruler of the Norse gods, was associated with death and sorcery. In Old High German, his name, Wotan, means leader of the possessed. The Wotan clan ain't nothing to mess with. His name also means Lord of Frenzy, right? Yeah, Frenzy and leader of the possessed. And how about that? That's Satan right there. Also depicted frequently with unclean birds, as we'll see coming up. You got anything else to say here?
Yeah, Odin was equated directly with someone that was a friend of the travelers, because he was considered a traveling god that would surprise visit people. And then sometimes he would turn into the bird itself. So very similar motifs that we see with Zeus, and and also even with Hindu gods, because there was one of them that was an avatar of Brahma, who also was a traveler who would visit people unknowingly.
Interesting. That traveler, the Odin, would transform himself into in a disguise, it said in the different accounts of the mythology, so-called, is that he would appear as a man with a wide-brimmed hat, and artists would depict this looking exactly like a wizard or a Merlin character, or like Mickey in Fantasia.
Yeah.
The two ravens that he had with him, named Hugin and Munin, they sit on Odin's shoulders, and the ravens tell Odin everything they see and hear, and Odin sends them out at dawn, and the birds fly all over the world before returning at night. As a result, Odin is kept informed of many events. It is from this association that Odin is referred to as Raven God, according to the Gylfaginning of the prose, my prose edda. It just goes to show that Odin wasn't thought to be omniscient, omnipotent. He couldn't be everywhere at once. Neither can Satan. He doesn't know everything. He's not all-knowing. Neither does Satan, because Odin is just one of the many reiterations of Satan.
He is. WesBlaze, do you remember me talking to you about, I went to a conference last year and gave a presentation?
Yeah.
A couple presenters after me, after I gave my presentation, he got up and he was an Odin worshiper. He even shouted "Hail Odin" during his presentation.
I remember you saying that. Yeah,
isn't that wild? That even in the modern day, there's people out there that they believe these gods are real. They're worshiping him to the point where they're giving speeches about him.
Yeah, the Norse pantheon, that whole situation of the Vikings was in the last 2,000 years, wasn't it? That was relatively recent on the grand scheme of this whole timeline of the pantheons and religions. And so we just saw Odin called a raven god associated with ravens. How about this? In that same Genesis 15 moment that we see fleshed out in Apocalypse of Abraham 19 through 23 that we read from earlier, in Jubilees 11:10, it's talking about the same moment with Abraham. And what does it say, Sean?
The prince Mastema sent ravens and birds to devour the seed which was sown in the land, in order to destroy the land and rob the children of men of their labors. Before they could plow in the seed, the ravens picked it up from the surface of the ground.
And the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And how about that? In order to destroy the land, rob and steal from the children of men and their labors. And he uses ravens to do so.
Yeah, I always thought this was interesting, that he does want to, like it talks about here, to destroy the land, because he's not going to allow the seed to develop and allow the land to be cultivated. Because it's interesting to me that between Egypt to Babylon, to Mesopotamia, like it's predominantly, like they're making changes now, but for a long time, it's desert type, barren wasteland.
Yeah, a wilderness, right?
Yeah, and it's funny to me because that seems to be what follows is the lack of land husbandry for people that the land itself is being defiled because with the unrighteous sacrifices that take place there, that blood goes into the land, and that's an unrighteous act, unrighteous blood. and so the land itself is revolting and not being nourished. And the punishment for Azazel is to be put into the wilderness in a hole in the ground,
Yeah,
not into a lush, green, beautiful garden-like area,
not into
but
the
put
desert
into a barren desert in a hole in the ground.
and be covered by rocks
Yeah, that's
forever,
why
even though it says that he is going to be,
right.
thrown into the fire too.
Yeah, there is a definition to forever. It's not always eternally, but
An age.
um, yeah, very interesting, man. There's a lot here.
It is. Yeah, this is just some of the highlights. Odin he has many names and is the god of both war and death. He is the one-eyed all-father, he's called. According to the Swedish History Museum, he sacrificed his eye in order to see everything that happens in the world. And one of the Viking dragon recounts the myth and the lore about Odin, says that he took a deep breath and reached to his face, and with a grunt, he plucked out his right eye. In great pain, he dropped his eye into the well of Mimir. And that was like below the earth tree, and he was dropping it into the well so that he could then be gifted wisdom and knowledge about the future and these kind of things, so he could know more, since he's not all knowing, but he wanted to be all seeing and the one-eyed all father. And this is just according to the legend, right? So he lost his right eye by his own doing, is what it said. But of course, Satan is going to take actual events and try to retell them as if he's responsible, like Enlil did with the flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Satan tried to take credit for the flood. But I think there's one interesting verse in Zechariah that we see after this. Would you read it?
So in Zechariah 11:17, it says, "Alas for the vain shepherds that have forsaken the sheep. The sword shall be upon the arms of such a one, and upon his right eye his arm shall be completely withered, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened."
Okay, so we don't see this in scripture necessarily, aside from this verse. And he was supposed to be a shepherd, right? Satan,
Right.
Azazel, was supposed to shepherd the people, and but he was vain and he forsook the sheep. And yeah, his right eye shall be utterly darkened. We don't have an account of the Azazel character, the devil, dragon, anything pertaining to his actual right eye, but we do have that with both Ra and with Odin.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, I personally don't think that Azazel that we have today actually has just one eye now, because he took his own eye out.
Right.
I don't think angelic bodies work like that. But definitely about the idea of him being a bad shepherd, meaning he's a ruler of the people. His
Yeah.
strength is going to be destroyed. His vision, his foresight, everything involved with him being able to rule his kingdom is going to be diminished, because we see in the end he gets what's coming to him.
Yeah, and we know his arm wasn't withered either. We don't get an account of that in the story, but it's just it's the same theme: a vain shepherd that, according to the tales that his own people tell about him in these religions, he lost his right eye.
Like that dude in Scary Movie 2 that's trying to stir the mashed potatoes with his little arm. He walks up to Yeshua in the desert. "Take my hand, I'll take you to the temple." I don't think it was him.
But then we get to the Norse mythology, and we had Odin, as we described, was what the Norse called Satan. And they had a place called Asgard. A lot of you might be familiar with that in the Marvel movies, right? In the Thor series. And Asgard is located in the sky, according to NorseMythology.org. And they say it's connected to Midgard, the world of humanity, by the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost. Rainbows, of course, also happen in the sky. And it's interesting that the Norse connected this to the home of Satan, because in modern society today, in our culture, we got people pushing an agenda of Satan using the rainbow, don't they?
They sure do. They sure do. And I've always thought it was interesting they called it the Bifrost. It would make perfect sense if you get certain altitude, it becomes extremely cold.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, it's just an interesting thought. But also, Odin is depicted in culture and media, modern arts, and all kinds of concepts, as he would have been the one that is represented, as you see in this cartoon depiction on the left, with the main sanctuary or tabernacle or whatever building that is, as if two horns extending to the sky.
I see that. Yeah, that's
that
right.
would have been his temple. So
he always had the horned helmet.
Yeah.
And whoever illustrated this from that comic has, the Asgard here floating around, and then there's a solar eclipse happening behind it.
That's right.
Making a connection there. It's as if they knew. The word Asgarder in the Old Norse language, is a compound formed from Old Norse as, which in their language means God. Interestingly enough, and Old Norse garter, which means enclosure, like a double gated dome would be enclosed around this place.
The god enclosure.
And then, of
Like,
course,
oh, you mean the house of their god?
right,
Interesting.
right. Then, of course, in the movie, the place of entry into this Asgard world is a sphere shaped like
It
an
is.
eye. Is it not?
Yep, that's right. And that's literally where that Helmdall guy would stand and look out on the earth from the place of the eye. Yeah.
Yep. To guard it. Here's another depiction of it zoomed in. Yep, that's the entryway into Asgard.
Like a lidless eye.
Yeah. Yes, sir. There's also the abode called Himmelbjorg, Heimdall's Hall. It stands at Heaven's End by the bridge head in the place where Bifrost joins heaven. Another great abode is there, which is named Valaskaljalf. Odin possesses that dwelling. And in this hall is the Hilgiskalha, and the high seat is so called. Whenever Allfather, which is what they referred to Odin, whenever Allfather sits in that seat, he surveys all lands. Ties right back again to what was said about Ra and his boat, what was said about Zeus and the Olympus, Mount Olympus, and what was said about Satan when he took Christ to be able to see all the kingdoms of the earth. It's over and over.
You think this Norse language is one of the languages from the Tower of Babel?
I don't know. I feel like it developed quite a bit later, maybe. But
it just sounds like someone has a lisp, you know.
Okay. So, in a modern depiction of the throne of Odin, and this is from one of the Thor movies, you have a very distinct shape to his throne.
That's right.
Because when you look at ancient depictions of the boat of Ra, throughout the hieroglyphs, throughout the reliefs in the pyramids, and even the sculptures that were made, they depicted the boat of Ra to look exactly like the throne of Odin is shaped here in this modern depiction. It's almost like the guys over at Marvel understand this connection.
It's wild, isn't it? It's like, who are these writers? Or is it just one particular guy that comes into the artist department and says, no. Here's how you're going to draw. He draws on a napkin. Here's how I want you to draw the throne of Odin.
So, bro.
I don't even know how that meeting goes, but
I don't either.
Their consistency is scary.
Yeah, it really is. And they're trying to tell us at the same time. They don't want us to know, but they want you to know.
Right, that's right.
Boat of Ra, Mount Meru, Mount Olympus, Asgard. Weird to tell you, it's the same pantheon of gods with the same king of that pantheon being Azazel, Satan, the devil, Serpent of Old, the dragon that deceives the whole world. And this is the same location depicted in different cultures as a place in the sky where Satan lives.
So am I to suggest or think that this is where Satan took Christ for that last temptation?
That's what we've been saying. Yes, sir.
That's amazing.